Hi, everyone. It's so fun to have a full house. So thank you for joining us today for this special talk with artist Kim Abeles. I'm Kelly Lindner, and I'm the Galleries and Collections Curator for the University Galleries. And I want to invite you to come over to the Library Gallery following the talk. We will be having a reception, and it'll give you a chance to see the work in person, much of the work that Kim's going to talk about today. So Kim Abeles is an interdisciplinary artist known for her community-based projects that explore biography, geography, and environment. She is the recipient of fellowships and awards from the Guggenheim Memorial Fellowship, the J. Paul Getty Trust Fund for the Visual Arts, the California Community Foundation, and the Pollock Grasner Foundation. Her projects have been funded by the National Endowment for the Arts and the Los Angeles County Department of Arts and Culture. She has created projects in collaboration with the California Science Center Campground, Arts Corrections and Fire Management in the Santa Monica Mountains, air pollution control agencies, health clinics, and mental health departments, along with natural history museums in California, Colorado, and Florida. She is Professor Emerita at California State University Northridge, where she taught public art and public practice from 1998 to 2009. She received her MFA at University of California, Irvine, and is currently living and working in Los Angeles. It has been my distinct pleasure to work with Kim over the last 18 months to bring the exhibition Kim Abeles Smog Collectors 1987 to 2020 to Sacramento State. I hope you have all had the opportunity to see the show, but if you've not, you will have a chance following this talk. And I encourage you to do a repeat visit if you have time. There's a lot to see, a lot to read, and it's a show that allows you to really slow down and take in what you're looking at. The Smog Collectors series started with a simple realization by the artist. She could not see the San Gabriel Mountains from her downtown Los Angeles studio. The mountain view was only a quota slice seen from her fire escape and situated between buildings. But still it struck Abeles that her craving to see blue sky, to see the mountains just off in the distance, was consistently obstructed by a man-made obstacle, air pollution. For 14 months, Kim photographed that mountain wedge from her studio, trying to get a clear view. A little bit later, on a first stage smog alert day, which became common in Los Angeles in the 80s, Kim decided to walk as a crow flies to the mountain to get a better view. 10 hours later, standing at the base, the mountain finally appeared. From this singular experience, which in turn Kim recognized was a human experience happening throughout a city, throughout the country, throughout the world, came a body of work that for 30 years has continued to engage the artist. The Smog Collectors is a reflection of our ongoing struggle to mitigate our human impact in creating air pollution. Abeles' work makes visible this thing that is invisible or barely visible when you're in it. I mean, I'm sure most of you have experienced at some point that you see the smog in the distance, but then when you're right in it, it doesn't appear to be there. So I invite you, when you go to the gallery, to take a look at the piece 60 Blocks Square of the Los Angeles Horizon, which depicts the city's skyline created by collecting air particulates on plexiglass. The piece is comprised of 3 suspended panels located at the back of the gallery. Viewed straight on, you can just make out the skyline. Come at the piece from an angle and you will directly experience the visual effects of air pollution becoming visible. This clarifying moment is just but one of the many instances in this series of works where the message and the visual impact coalesce through materiality. You can find this in the presidential and world leader portraits, as well as the dining room table and bassinet sculptures. Each section of the exhibition reveals another aspect of how, where, and why we are affected by air pollution. So Kim has a motto for her practice, which I want to share. Quote, "Art that provides a viewer with riveting portrayals of nature or society serves to re-engage a person with the physical world. This is where positive change has a possibility to take place." I hope this talk and the exhibition inspire you to be part of the change. So I want to thank my colleague Jennifer Frias, director of the Begovich Gallery at CSU Fullerton, for organizing the exhibition, which was first presented in 2021. This was an amazing opportunity to collaborate with another CSU university and colleague. I also want to thank my gallery staff, Ben Hunt and Mustafa Shaheen, for their dedication to making these exhibitions happen with all the complicated scheduling and installation needs that I throw at them. A special appreciation to Emma Montalbano, former gallery and collections intern, who worked tirelessly the past 6 months, helping me work through installation ideas, preparing loan forms, and assisting during the exhibition install. Most importantly, I want to thank the artist, for her vision, her generosity, and our inspiring conversations, which have been the highlight of this project. So please join me in welcoming Kim Abeles.
Thanks so much, Kelly, and I have appreciated the whole experience here at your beautiful campus with more trees than I've ever seen in one spot for a long time. So thank you for that. And also thanks for all of you for being here. I'm really thrilled. And let me get started here. So I titled this "The Environment That Is Us." I think a lot about the fact that we think of nature as something we're going to just be observers to. We're going to be on the outside looking in, and looking at nature as if everything's a big zoo and we're, in this kind of clean spot where we're observing. And I always have to remind people that we are nature also, so the things that we do really affect the rest of the environment, and we're not just outsiders visiting for a minute and so on. There's more to it than that. So I actually grew up in Pittsburgh for the most part, and we had this photograph in a book on our coffee table, and I used to look at this photograph all the time, and it's Pittsburgh in the afternoon. And it's because in 1945, all those steel mills, which were still running actually when I was a kid growing up there, were really in full production. And of course, the air was just unbelievable. And even as a kid, I remember all the darkened buildings because all of that smog and particulate had accumulated on there. So there it is, 9 in the morning. Sorry, I said afternoon. But you can see that the gas lights are on. That's the only reason why they can see in that way. So I went to undergrad school at Ohio University, and shortly after that, I lived in this grain silo that had been converted into a home. And I bring it up here because it really had a profound effect on me being in southeastern Ohio. And at that point, I wrote a book that Van Nostrand Reinhold published called Crafts, Cookery, and Country Living. And I was really into experimenting with the natural elements that were surrounding that grain silo and making notes on how to use these with art projects or to make teas and so on. And so I went from this environment, that's the silo right in the middle of this image, to this area in Los Angeles. And those of you that travel, you know that weird thing where you're in a certain place and then you're making a flight for a couple hours and you land and it's like, where am I? And the distinction between these two places was very profound with me. Kelly mentioned that in terms of the way I was, looking at the smog very early when I moved to Los Angeles. So my first studio was actually in downtown, right in the middle of downtown LA and 2nd and Broadway. And the first Smog Collector was actually made on the 4th floor fire escape porch of that building. So in getting there, I would often go to coffee shops and complain to people about the smog, and people would constantly say, "Oh no, that's fog." And they would say that over and over to me, and I was so frustrated because, my lungs were kind of heavy, and I could see my eyes were always watering, and because I had just landed there, it was really affected me. And it says a lot to me in terms of the way we get used to the environments that are around us. And we just think of that as what's really how it's supposed to be, and we just get kind of complacent about it. So I was always trying to think of ways and images that I could make that would be about this idea of the smog, and that that gas mask actually has my cat's fur in the part where it's supposed to be filtering and out. So anybody with a cat allergy. I'm sure that's going to really make you feel awful. So, and so early ideas on it really had to do with the way the stencils came about with those smog collectors. These are actually wings of cicada, wing shapes that are made out of smoke on glass. And they're hovering over these cicada that some of you may know about them. They come out every 13 and 17 years. And when they come out in a burst. And it reminded me of the way the cars, how the cars would come in and out of the parking lots downtown. I was living illegally in that building I showed you, but mostly downtown were people that were working down there. So in the morning they'd all whoosh in and you know, at 5 o'clock they'd all whoosh out. So it was exactly like they were the cicada. And so looking up on that fire escape, you can just barely see it wedged between those buildings in the back are the San Gabriel Mountains. And I had had that studio downtown for at least 4 or 5 years before I even knew that you could see the mountains from there. And as Kelly mentioned, it was really because of the smog in the air and the way it affects the visibility. And so one day I did see it and I was just breathtaken by it. It was the most beautiful thing. It was like seeing a vision of the Virgin Mary or something. It was so beautiful. And I thought I would photograph every day out that fire escape till I could see it again. And it ended up taking a year and almost 2 months. And so on the right here, you can see some of these photographs that I took trying to get that wedge, which now you can't see the mountain back in there. Like this is during the Lakers parade. So what I loved about making this project was I was really zeroed in on seeing that mountain and waiting for that clear day. And there was so much activity also going on the street below. There were always different things happening. So that kind of collision about our world as we think about it and the world as we envision it really came together all the time. So I made this walk-through bellows, like of a bellows of a camera that housed all those hundreds of efforts to see that mountain wedge in those photographs. They're all dated and timed, as you see there. And now you can see the mountain maybe a little bit better in this image. Oh. And here's the way the bellows looks when it's all constructed. So you actually, as the viewer, walk through there. And you see at the end there, it's actually an oil painting I made of the mountain wedge. It's about 10 feet tall to give you the scale on that. And what happened really was after, you know, I had seen the mountain wedge and then I was trying to see it and it never, ever, ever looked the same as that first vision that I had. It never really mounted to that. So there was a part of me that thought a painting, more as I remember it really, was really the optimum way to show you how it felt to be there. And on the right is the very first smog collector that was made, and we lucked out, you'll see that it's at the exhibit. And it was made in this early part of 1980s. And this clock is there too. This is a clock I made. It's based on the frequency of taking photographs. So every time I took a photograph of the mountain wedge, I put it on the clock. So the clock, which does function in terms of going round and round, actually is really a document about that photo taking. So Kelly mentioned this also about this walk that I took. You know, if you do a project for a long time, you get so attached to the subject of it. And I thought, oh, on a first smog alert day, I would see how close I'd have to be to the mountains to see them. So if I walked, I went as the crow flies, which means if I had to cut through people's houses, I had to convince them to let me do that. And all sorts of things happened on that journey. And even there was one part where, you know, mothers would come out and say, honey, don't walk in this neighborhood. And there were other neighborhoods where I'd knock on the door of like very large houses and I think these people are never going to let me come through this house, okay? And you know, there's a certain luck that accompanies you on projects like this. A man opens the door, some kind of caretaker to this house, and I see my friend Arnold Meshy's painting right there in the foyer, right where the front door was. And I said, oh my God, that's Arnold's painting. And so they let me in. And I just think when you have this mission, people just allow you this. And, you know, I went over freeways and under freeways, over barbed wire fences. I mean, I was a mess by the time I got there. And I had to be at the foot of that mountain to really see it. And friends had offered to give me a ride home, you know, after I did this. And it was such a long journey. And I thought, this is sort of like going to the prom and then your parents have to pick you up. I didn't want to do that. So I decided I'd take a bus home. And the bus driver was like very alarmed the way I looked because my glasses were broken. I was all cut up. And, you know, I was just in a shambles. I sat in a red anthill at one point, so I was all eaten up and stuff. And so I quickly told him what I did, you know, and he said, you're not paying bus fare, just come on in, you know. So it was sort of like everybody rallied around this singular person doing it. And I just, it's one of those experiences that was a performance, but not intended to be a performance, but became one, and so on. So this piece is actually also in the show, I'm glad to say, because I haven't seen it installed in quite a long time. And I wanted to show you some of the other works that I have done with the idea of the skies, because the sky is always something that is really akin to my heart at this point. And so I made this contraption and I faced it toward Riverside, toward the east, to a particular spot of sky, and every day for 60 days I looked through the little opening in the contraption and then I matched the color of the sky in paint. So the 60 samples that you see are actually the samples from that 60 days. And part of the point was that, you know, we always teach kids that the sky is blue. You can find, you know, hundreds of kids' books that talk about the blue sky, and a lot of times it is not that. And again, I think the problem I always have is, you know, there's what's real and what's imagined and what's wished and what could be, and to understand, it's not like I'm asking you not to have all those different ways of viewing, but to also really understand the intersections between those things are really where our best thought processes can come from. So I've done a series of works that became a public artwork where I asked people to send me images of their sky, and in exchange, I would make a print of their sky with 12 others. So there were always 13 in there. And everybody's always credited for it and the location of where that sky is. And this idea that our sky is a real contiguous unit has to do with the boundaries we always give with land geography, and also sometimes with air, of course, with airspace. But, you know, we always want to make these kind of artificial distinctions that separate us when the sky is really flowing contiguously, right, up around the globe. So the final piece for this is actually a permanent piece that suspends. It's 30 feet in diameter, so it's quite large. And you can see here that all those skies people gave me are being woven together. I printed them on aluminum so that I could then suspend them on this ellipse. And they're also done as light panels suspended from the ceiling in that same spot. And a piece that I'm actually finishing up right now that relates to that a lot, these are 32 types of trees represented by their leaves, and they run 60 feet up on this mixed-use building in the city of San Gabriel. And the trees that are represented are the oldest trees in the world, the oldest living trees. So a lot of the work begins with this kind of research that maybe I have a vague idea how this is going to come together, but the research really begins to dictate how the piece winds up. And these trees and their leaves run along the building, but the images on those leaves are taken at the site of the tree. So there's a legend that accompanies this, and it shows you the orientation that they are on the building. And then it tells you a couple things about these trees. It tells you not only the scientific name, but it tells you the neighborhood name, because there's often these nicknames given to the trees, and where they're located, and then who took that sky photo. So the legend is on that building itself so that you can read more about the history of some of these trees, because just think about it. A tree that's like 1,000 years old or 2,000 years old has seen a lot, right? And I think this history that we gain from these ancient trees is really a beautiful way of storytelling about an individual place, as well as us as visitors to these locations. And this one is still ready to be installed. This leaf on the top there is actually, it's called a fossil leaf. And if some of you have taken botany courses, you may have seen these before. They're 380 million years old. And they're the first leaves that were on what we first called a tree, right? So they're not like just a plant, they're from a tree. They will follow what that definition is. And what I've put on that leaf is actually, I wonder if some of you know about this, the WMAP. It's the Wilkinson Microwave Anisotropy Probe. And what it is, NASA and the WMAP group for 9 years did research collecting heat data, basically, in the universe, all right? So the image, and I'll show you the full one here on the left, this is the most concise image of the universe that we have. And I'll tell you, my friend Pete Del Rosso, who's like a rocket scientist, I called him while I was making this piece and I said, "Oh, Pete, I need an image of the universe. What do you think? Tell me a good one." And I thought he was going to send me more like that square one, like stars. Like, isn't that what you think? Send me a picture of the universe. He sends me this, right? And at first, I was so disappointed. I'm like, this looks like paintings that my friends make. It's like, and then the more I realized how extraordinary that was, that the kind of technology that we have will actually produce, with patience and years, this most extensive view of the universe that anyone has ever seen. It just blows your mind. So it really should be, shouldn't it, on the most ancient of those leaves, on the one that's 380 million years old. So again, these kind of juxtapositions. And I just want to point out one more thing with this, in that, this is like time and space for this part of the installation on that building, in that it goes from the most ancient to the most current. And the final image on the ginkgo is actually where you're standing. So it kind of goes through space to where you are. And this photograph of the moon is from Apollo 11, and it's from 1969, right? So we're seeing the Earth from the moon. And the beauty of that photograph compared to this one is that this is done with an analog camera. This is a Hasselblad camera that they took up there on the Apollo 11, right? And so for me, this project has a lot to do with the way technology weaves in and out of what we are and how we understand not only where we are on Earth, but the whole universe, in fact. So I've been doing lately, because I do love that map so much of the universe. So I cut out of some of those images that I have, like this is in London, leaves that would be local to the area, and they're floating in the universe in this kind of way. So the smog collector process, I thought I would go over that so you have a little bit of sense. And if you've seen the show or go to see the show, you'll understand how this also came about. So I basically do drawings and put them on objects, and then I cut them out as stencils and then place them on rooftops. The particulate matter that's in the air that's so serious if we breathe it in, and we are constantly, is actually made out of, metals, lead, depending on where you are. It could be fibers coming out of a factory. When cars hit the road with their tires, those bits of rubber and plastic fly into the air as small particles and become airborne. And so what happens is when these are outside, there's an accumulation of all that particulate matter on that. So then I bring them in, and when that stencil is removed, you see the difference between where the image is protected and where it's been exposed. So part of the reason I had shown you that first Smog Collector, that was in like 1987, and I really kicked this up as a whole series of work that I still accomplish here. Because in the early 90s, I was living near a factory that was spewing out formaldehyde. And as artists, we had tried for a long time to get the city to do something about it. Eventually, they raised the stacks, but raising the stacks only moves the problem to somebody else's neighborhood. But I got so frustrated that I remembered that I had done that experiment and felt like that was a good way to find voice, right? I mean, that's a prominent thing that art can always do. It gives voice to issues that are either complex or difficult to understand, or we don't want to think about them. And the art brings it forth in a way that is more, I would say, emotional. So it can combine politics with humor, or these feelings that we have that are not clinical or data-based, but really very visceral and tactile. And so this is actually a dinner that's made in smog, and it's placed over an image of the factory. I snuck in there and took some pictures of the factory behind there. And so health was a lot of issue when I lived in that place and the smog was there. I was very concerned about that. So time is a big element in these smog works, and in a lot of the work I do actually. So you can see from the titles that I'm always really telling you the increment of time that the smog work was out there. And I often do use a month as an increment. This one's 40 days, but I always feel like with a month you can sort of picture what that is on a calendar. You have a sense of that. Sometimes because of the rains, I really add to that, like how long that would be in the rain, as well as in the, particulate matter that's happening on a normal day. And this is my daughter's high chair, and that's Zoe right there. So now, a full-grown adult going, and I bring this up, and it's interesting that Zoe's here, because a lot of times what happens to artists is that you know, you have to have a personal connection on why you want to work with topics. I think often we want to talk about issues, but unless we can really read about them or really feel them, I think the work runs a little flat. So in this case, it was because we were in this situation. I was raising a beautiful baby, and you know, the upset had to really be kind of coagulate somewhere, right, in the artwork. But I do also think that we can also read up very carefully on a subject to really sort of get it inside us, so that we can really get images that aren't kind of pulled out too hard, but really sort of come to us because we do have a knowledge of the information. So different ways that I did it. I did a lot with dining rooms and so on, in part because, you know, we're ingesting this stuff, right? This particulate. So, and I also think we always feel kind of safe inside our homes. And there's contradictions that happen there. You know, I did quite a few with New World Order stuff because a lot of the smog work was during the Bush administration, and actually the plates that you have upstairs, they refer to George Bush as the environmental president, and I'm going to look for a quote here. And, you know, in the context of the time, that made a lot of sense. But now I wonder, like, do you guys really think he was an environmental president? And you know, sometimes people say, yes, he did a lot with the Clean Air Act, right? So again, I think history isn't like just a obvious thing, it's this way or that way. I think there are always complications, but there's a historian that I often refer to ask questions about his take on environmental issues as they are historically. And one of the things he said about the Bush plate, when I was concerned that nobody was going to get it about the environmental, that it was like tongue-in-cheek also. He says the progress that had been made in the U.S. regarding air pollution controls was largely negated by globalization. The smog was merely offshored, only to come back with the wind. So, you know, you gotta look at these 4 pictures, I believe, on these issues. So he was also the one that helped me when I was getting ready to do the presidential commemorative smog plates. And in the show, you can see the complete set of the 17 presidents. So it's from McKinley to Bush. And I left them out longer if their environmental records were bad. So you can see the grades of gray here. Roosevelt's, I thought they gave a pretty good effort there. And so that was out for only 4 days. And you can, I guess, see what I'm thinking with the Ronald Reagan. It's out for 40 days. And their quotes about the environment and industry are written in bold around these plates. So during COVID, I had put out this 15-foot tall smog collector, and when everything was getting locked up, I thought I better get this off of this roof that I had made arrangements to put it on, because I didn't have any sense how long it would be there. And I actually ended up bringing it inside my studio. And so when you see that smog collector up there, just remember that was pretty much all interior particulate that was collected for this piece. And you can get a sense of the scale when the full thing is installed. The other pieces that you'll see, I had done a full series of cave paintings. The distinction about, you know, the way we make marks in the world, right? Like, you know, the hand that's on the cave paintings, or here's from Lascaux, the aerial gallery, like these marks that humans make to leave behind, and the smog is kind of also a mark we leave behind. And when I put this in this section for you about time, I was also interested to show you that this was in 12 days of smog. And then suddenly the Los Angeles uprising had happened when the Rodney King verdict came in. And these pieces, just by chance on that timing, had all that ash from all the fires that had happened in Los Angeles. And that sort of thing has happened a couple times on these, that certain social issues and reactions that happen really affected what you're seeing in the texture of this piece. This one also I wanted to bring forward to you because the photograph in the back of this image of an engine is actually from the early 1900s, an electric car factory that had started up. And you probably all read at some point or another how there was an effort very early on to have electric cars, and then it had just been squelched. So again, this combination of the particulate that we end up a lot because of automobiles and vehicles, that's the majority of the pollution is actually caused by that. And this was another one that was actually inadvertently caught in the fires up in Boulder, Colorado. So during COVID, right over the hill from where we were living with family in Pasadena, the fires, the Bobcat fires had started up. And I remember going out one day in between, you know, the COVID and the epidemic and these fires, it was like hell just broke loose right in front of me. And I grabbed these chunks of wood that I had pulled out of somebody's trash can, and I put these images of the Titanic deck chairs on top of them. And I can't even describe to you the panic I had that I had to get these on the rooftop immediately. And the Titanic was really the perfect metaphor, honestly. Not only that, you know, that saying where they say that they're rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic as it's going down and stuff, but also just this idea of like a massive ship like that, and sort of the aspirational part of a vehicle like that, and then the final story of what happened because it, you know, crashes in, right? So this kind of collision about what humans think and what our natural world thinks back, you know, that kind of push and pull about it. So I did another set. I got so interested in this idea of the Titanic, and I researched there were actually 3 types of plate patterns that they had on the boat. I don't know if you've ever heard that before, for first, second, and third class, and each had a different type of motif to it. And so I went through the different motifs, and I ended up using them as an image that surrounds one of the deck chairs on the plate. And you can see the Titanic going down on the right. I did try to make this a little bit uplifting. If you follow the narrative from the top and go around, it does end up with the motifs of some of the plates, with these beautiful flowers kind of emerging on there. I do try to be a little upbeat, and there's definitely humor in a lot of this work. That you can see puddled there, that is gold mica on the bottom, and I had wanted to put mica around this plate to sort of show the economy, so to speak, the money related to the Titanic. And as I was doing it, all this mica dust was going in the air, and I thought, oh my God, the smog that we see out there, it's actually gold dust falling on us. You know, if you think about why we have that smog problem, it's all economic, right? It's all about making stuff and shipping stuff. And so it is kind of like dust particles of gold, like falling along with the emissions, right? So there is this idea of art and activism, and I thought I'd show you some ways that this comes forward. This is actually a suitcase that I welded in the shape of a dolphin, and it's covered with storm drain trash that went through the storm drain system from the city to the beach. So it's not trash that beach goers left, it's stuff that actually goes through the city. And it was used for many years and is still used to teach young kids what the storm drain system is. Part of the problem is we have these very complex infrastructure systems in the areas that we've made, right? And we don't really know anything about it. As long as the lights go on, we're satisfied. And I think a lot of times it's important that we really understand what that infrastructure is and how it relates to the way we do things like litter, for instance. And so trash and particulate, pollution of all kinds, I think they're all very interrelated. This is actually a figure made out of Earth Day trash from visitors at the California Science Center. And the figure is 48 feet long, and it's based on the amount of trash that I collected that day. And there was so much trash, I had to rent a public storage unit and store the trash for about 6 months while I kept pulling it out to clean and wash and iron it, and then to make this figure from it. And so the idea that you would like bring this back to the people, like this is your trash, here it is, think about it, right? So I had this residency at Montalvo, and because I was there alone, I thought, oh wow, for 1 month, the only trash I'm going to generate is mine. It's not going to be my family's trash. I can really isolate what I'm making, and I did not try to be a better person while I did it. It wasn't like, I want you to think that I don't buy this stuff, okay? So I just did it. And again, I have to iron it. In this case, what I did was I shredded it, I cut it. I just wanted to see that if I was in charge of all my trash, what's it take to really refine it? Because so often somebody else is taking care of our stuff, you guys. It's like you throw something away and it's just out of your vision, And so I just wanted to see what it took to be like 100% responsible. This took me like 6 years to finish this thing, okay? Because you get down to a part and like, what the heck am I going to do with this piece? And kind of figuring it out. So I ended up making a hope chest out of it. And what I do, I take it around to try to encourage people to compost. Because if there's one thing you can do as an individual, it's composting. It does kind of a couple things. It keeps all that trash out of the landfill. And I think probably all of you by now know about the methane that comes out when all these mixed trash things are happening. And we're putting them there. But it also, for me, it really got me to observe when I compost, like, what's my purchasing action? Like, we're so good at consuming. I mean, we're like expert consumers. And I think to be able to individually observe, like, what your choices are and how you deal with it, rather than just thinking somebody else is going to deal with it for you, goes a long way. And so for 6 months, I worked with women that are incarcerated that do firefighting. And they worked on art with me, and it's up in the Santa Monica Mountains. And so we made 10 valises, or AKA suitcases, that are now used by the National Park Service rangers and also LA County fire educators to teach people about firefighting and also fire abatement. And they're all built from the ground up. And so I couldn't do welding where where the prison is. So sometimes we would design things and I would take them home and weld them, and we'd get parts done, and then the next Sunday I'd bring them up and we'd work on them. if any of you are interested in social practice and working on community-based work, there are a few things that came out of this for me that were important. One was, the women didn't have to work with me. I worked in the end with about 80 women, and it crossed my mind how often people have to work with me. Like, most projects are built that, like, I've worked with families coming out of domestic violence and live in like halfway house type situations and stuff. And if I do a project with them, I realize they have to work with me or they can't be in the halfway house. It's just part of the agreement that is made. Or even with teaching, if you're in my class, you have to work with me, And so it was so astonishing to think all those years I thought they wanted to work with me. And I realized, no, because these women did not have to do it. They weren't going to get any time off their sentence. They weren't going to get any points or any extra thing. And so what happened was I didn't want them to have to work on these projects. So I would bring in the materials and they could make stuff for their, their kids and their families or themselves. They could make art projects. I would teach them any skill that we were talking about, but they didn't have to work on the suitcases. But slowly everybody wanted to, because their families are very proud of what they do. They are like superheroes out there when they're fighting these fires and doing all this abatement. And this was really about expressing that to the larger community about what they do and also what the meaning is of them doing all this hard labor. Because I don't know if you've ever done any clearing on a mountainside or something. It is like very physical work in the heat and so on. So I'll stop here, but there are 10 in all, and you can see more of them actually on the on YouTube. I'm going to sort of slide through these because before I close, I do want to show you a couple particular things. But printed matter is another way that I think the activism can come forth. And activity books for kids and family is a big part of how I also work. The topics are very different. This one is given out to families that are waiting to see the doctor at a free clinic, and I designed it so that the adult or the teenager is on one side and the little kid is on the other side of the book, but the information relates on those double pages each time. And I actually brought some of the cards that I make. These get split up into singular cards and they're on various topics. And this was the first one I have done, and it's gone through 3 different printings actually, and updated material about HIV/AIDS. And stickers are a way to put information out there. Usually the idea is that it leads to a website. In this case, it leads to a website I have called frugalworld.org that tells not only about my projects, but other projects that artists have made that deal with conservation and stewardship and environmental issues and so on. And actually, there's Zoe again in the middle. Artists with families, who could beat that, right? And we did this booth with, we printed t-shirts and all this. And the thing that I found really funny is that the problem everybody was having with it is they wanted to know, is this a business? Or what am I looking at here? We all want to really define what things are, and it wasn't anything really except to try to gauge how did people get to this festival. Did anybody come on a skateboard, or did they all come in cars, or and really sort of block that out so people would start thinking You know, originally the stickers were made to give out to people that ride buses. I would be asked often to these environmental groups, and everybody would come in with their wonderful cars, you know, their electric cars and stuff. And I'd say, you know, we should be celebrating really are the people that ride mass transit, because that's really our best bet right now, honestly, until vehicles are more affordable and stuff like that. So those kind of issues come up for me. This one was to encourage people to use this particular bus in Boulder by finding the lichen that I had identified with the lichen hunt. And I wanted to show you two odd ones. Somebody wanted to do smog watches at one point, and JCPenney's was going to produce these until I think they realized that the messaging was like a little trickier than they at first expected. And so I like these ideas that you kind of combine the kind of consumer world that we know with art objects that mess with that a little bit, right? And in a similar kind of way, Deutsche Bank commissioned me to make, I think I made 125 of these images of the globe. And I gave it a lot of thought, and these were all given out to like their high-end investors, right? And for me, every audience has some value there. Can you picture that? That if the art is really also about messaging and trying to get people to think alternatively, then every audience has a value in that communication. I'm gonna buzz through, Kelly. Should I do sharp on the 1, yeah? 1 o'clock?
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Sometimes they were projects that were done all over. So Smog Collectors and Smog Collector sculptures put throughout the city so you could compare it. These were done by the Bureau of Automotive Repair, which was actually up here in Sacramento. And part of the goal was not only to get people to really do emissions testing on their car, but also to do rideshare, which now sounds like rideshare, what's the big deal? I'll ride with you. But at the time, people really didn't think to do that, okay? Or you had to kind of convince them to do that. Let's do that. Projects with classes, I still do a lot of that. I actually am doing Eliza Gregory's class, and some of the other photo classes we're making Smog Collectors. And I do want to push forward. I want to close with a real particular image. You're not frustrated, are you? Okay. Let's see, can I roll faster? Let me roll faster here. So, okay, let me do this. So, you know, Ansel Adams photos, right? Those beautiful landscapes. Well, I wanted to do Smog Collectors with Ansel Adams photos. So I wrote to the Ansel Adams Foundation, and they wrote me back, and they said that even his widow hated the idea. Okay, so that led me on that I would access other kinds of collections in museums, and to let me make translations in smog of certain images. And this is Lois Connor and Margaret Burke White, and you can see that I'm making this translation in the same size as the original. We have an example of one of these upstairs. These were American landscape paintings. Then the frame is actually done in detritus, you know, in junk, to be the same width as the original. And this is the one we have upstairs at the gallery. And I did this collaboration with the Garage Museum in Moscow with world leaders, and in this case, it's their quotes from climate summits. I got on this kick for a while that well, I'm still on this kick actually, that, you know, we think that individual responsibility is where we're supposed to take the changes we make in society, in our environmental issues. And okay, the individual is great, but you know what? These leaders are individuals too. And if we can do our individual efforts, I expect our leadership to do the same. And so a lot of what they say sounds great. A lot of it's very inspirational. And then I want to know where the action is. So these were done with a variety of the leaders that had, and they're done in the language that they originally gave the speech, and then the translations are available so you can see what they say. And they were in the Natural Resources Defense Council, exhibited them in Chicago at an art fair. And then lastly, I asked people in their capitals to put them out and collect the smog in the capitals where these leaders are from. And I'm going to close with this image. Last year I had this opportunity to work with Rosamond Adu Deborah. Her daughter died of severe asthma at the age of 10 years old. And on the death certificate, Rosamond insisted that the coroner say that she died of air pollution. And I was so impressed that she would understand that a heavy focus that gave to what was really happening here. The child would be walking to school in a highly polluted area of South London, and the mom still has an organization where they're always really putting high pressure on Sadiq Khan and the other, leaders in London to make changes in the way they want these emission-free zones and so on. So this is my role model, that a mom could do this and have the insight to realize that she was making a real political statement by putting that on the coroner's report. That is such an impressive, powerful idea. So thank you very much. So it's 1 o'clock, and I don't know if some of you need to go. I understand. I don't know if you have any questions you want to. Yes.
I have a question. Your work has a strong, clear environmental image. You've been doing it for quite a while. I'm wondering if there are any moments that you can point to when when something happened in response to your work and you could say, they get it. It's you hit home particularly.
Yeah, I think I've experienced that a fair amount, in fact, because the way the work looks, it's very highly crafted and carefully, done, and for all intents and purposes, it looks like an etched image, right? And what happens is when people look at it, there is that moment where they realize what it is, and it is very observable, the response they get to it. And that is part of the reason I say that all art is really a beautiful vehicle to express some of these ideas that we really don't want to think about, because the art is I mentioned it before, but I'll sort of repeat it. It's got a little bit of an emotional connection to it, and I think also just the tactile sense of when we approach something like a sculpture makes our body kind of connect to the artwork that's in front of us. Yeah.
How were you able to stay motivated through the Smog Collectors project?
Yeah. What's it? Could you tell me the answer? No, that's a hard one, because I do try to keep upbeat in my heart about it. See, I do believe we're at this like intense, like pivotal moment in all sorts of things with the environment and also with society, right? And it all seems so chaotic. You're nodding, so I'm guessing you think that too. But how could it not be when change is in the next step, right? Change is such a weird thing, and that's where my optimism comes from, like kind of even historically observing what change really means. I often think, because I've done some work on Rosa Parks, and often people talk about, when she refuses, the bus, Montgomery bus boycott and all that. It seems like one moment, right? One moment, and then one outlook, and then the Montgomery boycott happened, and then, civil rights movement billows up and stuff. But it wasn't that. She was an activist all her life from when she was a young kid. And so change always seems like it just happened here, but it's really this continuum that happened. And I think sometimes our impatience about wanting, like we can envision what the world we want, and it seems so obvious, like the better ways to make everybody equal and, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. I've heard that a billion times, right? It's not a really hard thing to figure out what that would mean to everybody, right? But I do think all our pressure forward is what keeps me optimistic and motivated. You know what I mean? It's like everything's like a ripple effect, and sometimes you've affected people and you don't know till years later, maybe somebody, if you're lucky, comes back and mentions that it changed them. So can you buy that? Isn't it something like that though? It's like constant pressure. Like, I want to give one more example. I mentioned Sadiq Khan. I didn't show you because I couldn't find the image, but we did Smog Collectors on Sadiq Khan. This is a great mayor of London, okay? He really believes in social equality and, understands what social injustice is. And the people I was working with had suggested that I do Sadiq Khan on a plate, and I just was like, wait a minute, he's a good guy. I had to really like wrestle with that. And it was my husband, in fact, who said, because I was really angsting over it almost every day, okay, this plate. He had a very inspirational quote about social justice issues and environmental justice and stuff, that we need to keep applying pressure to leadership, just constant pressure on it, and also within one's personal space as well as our community spaces, like thinking how change can take place and what we're really wanting, what is it really, And I think that constant pressure, I really appreciated understanding that. Anybody else? Yeah. Oh, I'll go front and back. Okay.
Oh,
Oh, sorry. It was confusing.
Should I go?
Sure.
I have a question for you about, pretty sure like you experienced a sense of pity or criticism while you were in the process of all your projects. And I'm sure that you had a purpose, vision, and like an urge for, like you felt a responsibility for what you're doing that kept you like grounded and like focused. But I wanted to know how did you deal with that criticism and stayed focused on your purpose?
Yeah, I hope all of you caught that. Like sort of about the discouragement that can happen and criticism that you can get when you're doing projects. And God, you're not going to expect this for the answer, I don't think. The long and short of it is, I guess I feel like the only thing I really have is what my ideas and my ethics, which I try to keep high, what they offer. So the criticism or even the accolades have nothing to do with the one thing that I do have, which is my ability to make this work. So that's pretty much a gift, I think, for artists to have that and to try to really savor what that is, because I think it's easy to be influenced negatively and positively, in other words. And I think there was another one back there. Question? Yeah.
I'm not sure if this is like kind of like the same question as first, but I wanted to ask, like, how did you handle the degrading comments and the criticism that they would tell you, like, for example, that really disgusting comment that they told you that about working with you? Like, how did you handle all those type of criticisms? Like, what was your reaction?
Is that kind of a similar question, I think, maybe?
Oh, the same one.
About, did I imply I'm criticized a lot?
Well, there was like one where, I guess, where they said that even his widow wouldn't want you to do that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, well, ultimately, that was funny. But, you know, no, I see. It's maybe something like that, what you all were thinking of. I guess, here's the best answer, okay, is that's a stumbling block. Actually, the criticisms are stumbling blocks, right? And there is always a solution. There's always like a bunch of solutions, right? It's almost more like, which solution are you gonna like go to next? And so those stumbling blocks, it made me go to the next museum in the case of the example you said, or in the case of, say, the women, I was saying, like, at first it was really hard when I was working with the incarcerated women. I was such an outsider going up there, you know, like, come on, everybody, you know, we're gonna repaint this room. Oh, no, okay. You know, I just think the vulnerability that artists can put themselves in with social practice is like such a beautiful spot if you can like handle the heat, which is kind of where both of your comments are from. I mean, I handle the heat. That's it. Okay. Yeah.
I'm curious if you've ever had any of your art objects or your pieces tested in a lab to see what types of chemicals you've collected?
Yeah, we did. You know, I did a project with LA Unified School District, and I didn't lead the project. I want to say the Municipal Art Gallery did it, and I was kind of the advisor or something, right? And Air Quality Management District did, you know, analyze and also, you know, microscopically what it looks like and stuff, and that was really interesting. And again, you know, it kind of depends on where you do it. Like if you do it in farming communities, you may get a lot of pesticides and stuff, right? So it all depends, but I think that angle is really definitely of interest to me. Yeah.
So you've used terms like artist and activist and social practice to describe your work, but would you consider yourself and your work to be a contribution to science or
a contribution? Oh yeah, I would say. I think a person that's an activist is a contributor. I mean, maybe you're thinking of activism as like an agitator or something like that. I don't know.
More leaning towards like the social practice aspect. I'm wondering if like you go outside of that and view yourself more of a contributor to the scientific research
Oh,
of the smog and of the air pollution environment.
I'm having a tough time knowing how to answer that. I think they're all kind of operating at the same time. The thing with working with people when I'm doing this stuff, I have to keep a pretty open mind over what's happening. Like there have been projects when I was first doing social practice where, you know, I hope I'm on the right track or where, okay, where I had in mind like what the outcome should be for this thing, right? And it was like, nobody's cooperating. It's like, hey, I'm the artist, you know, like, no, I'm kidding. I would never just think that. But I'm just saying, once I opened my mind and I was like, oh my God, these people, whether they're scientists or groups, community groups or something, I gotta listen 100% to what they're saying, because I know what I'm saying, but they're saying something I never heard before. And that is a beautiful gift. And I think that activism really comes out of trying to make a level playing field between all the people that are participating in a project. And sometimes the participants are also the audience, like keeping open. Did that hit at all what you were asking?
Yeah, it did.
Okay, but I do think community-based art is a contribution, I think is the one. Yeah.
I'm curious if any of the people that you depicted on your plate, if they're aware that those plates of them exist.
That they exist?
Yeah, do they know that you depicted them? Like, have they given you any?
Well, I imagine some do. I mean, I think I scurried through it, but you'll see in the show there's like an Obama McCain diptych that's based on the promises they made about emissions limitations when they were running for president. And that was Discover Magazine did that with me. So I suspect, some of these things are in like bigger magazines that I would think that they would have heard about them. I know that this architect that I work with wanted me to send the Modi plate to him in India, and she thought he would think that was the coolest thing on earth, and I didn't think that. But you know what you're bringing up for me, which is why I'm getting a little confused by the answer maybe, but like somebody wanted me to do Greta Thunberg on a plate, and then I thought, wow, they don't really understand what I'm doing. It's like, I'm really trying, I'm not making like little souvenir things, out of a cool material. And I think I didn't used to have that problem with the work, like those kind of art aesthetic conflicts. But I think what has happened, I'm really getting off now, I'm sorry, but it's just that there's so much art that's been made in the last, I'd say, decade or two that are always odd materials. Like that's been a big thing. And I never really saw the smog work in that category as a weird material. I saw it as a plea for justice, sort of, like a call for like, wake up everybody, that kind of thing. So, I don't know. You guys will understand. Anybody else? I'll try to stay on target.
I had a question about the medium and the materials. You use stencils to collect like the negative space for the smog. How do you make that? Is it like digitally done, or do you use an X-Acto knife for it?
Yeah, I draw and then cut with an X-Acto.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And actually, tomorrow, if you want to go to Eliza's class, the students will bring in theirs, and you could sort of see what happened.
12 p.m. Kadima 264. You
There you
can
go.
come see.
Anybody else? Yeah.
Technical question on how do you fix that smog on your surface?
Yeah, that's a good one. In the original ones, nothing. They're just framed carefully. Okay, and that's why I was glad to see that first one from '87. It hasn't moved because it's all oil product. That's the deal, right? But the ones like we're doing in the class, there's stuff called SpectraFix, and it's a recipe that Degas used to use, kind of a casein thing, natural, to fix his pastels and charcoal drawings. And so before we take the stencil off, it's a pump spray, it's not an aerosol. I mean, through the time, I've been able to refine better. Like, I'm not trying to cause pollution while I'm making pollution, stuff like that. So then we pump spray it lightly before we take the stencil off. But if you just took it off and carefully, protected it under glass, you wouldn't need to do any of that.
So it's kind of the same rule of thumb, the way you would work with dry pastels. And
Yes.
mix them.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Oh, I saw. Oh, okay, thank you. Well, anyway, I'll be around if anybody else has any questions, and I don't want to, you know.